1 million earthworms per acre is about 25 earthworms per square foot of soil. So basically one shovelful.
1, 2, 3.
Coming up on The Modern Acre, we're talking to my 2024 Ag Person of the Year, Arun Ohri.
The Modern Acre is the podcast for builders in ag who think differently. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Myland, a soil health company that's revolutionizing agriculture. Through their innovative soil as a service, Myland partners with farmers to improve their soil health with the power of beneficial live native microalgae. The result? Healthier soils, more productive farms, and benefits like smarter water use. Discover how Myland can transform your farm at myland.ag. All right, Tim, we got your guy. Okay, it was the 2024 Acre Awards Ag Person of the Year. Arun, super excited for this conversation. He is a unconventional guy doing unconventional things. So excited to share his story on the podcast. I think his first podcast ever, perhaps. So that's super exciting. Really quickly, there's been a ton happening, Tim, with Doge and Elon doing his thing with cutting across the government. And not a big shocker here, the USDA was in his crosshairs over this past week or so. A lot of cuts happening across the USDA. We are trying to find someone to come on the podcast to enlighten us. What does this mean? What does this mean for farmers? Tim, we're already seeing some impacts on our farming operation, on some potential grants that we are working on. So I think a lot of wide-ranging implications across research, NRCS, FDA. There's a ton of implications here. So we're trying to have someone on the pod to give it to us straight. What does this mean? What are the implications? So if you know of anyone that has a really objective view of what's going on right now, shoot us a message on LinkedIn. We'd love to. We're trying to find a person or a few people to come on the podcast to share with more people about what's going on here. So wanted to hit that first. But Tim, give us a quick preview into you visited Arun a few months back. You call me immediately after getting in your truck on the way back, and you're like, Tyler, you're not going to believe this. I just had a crazy experience on Arun's farm. So give us a quick preview.
Yeah, I got in touch with Arun through Matt Nicoletti from Penny Newman. Shout out Matt, but was able to tour Arun's farm up north of Sacramento back in November. Just had an amazing experience. He farms almonds, pistachios, primarily tree nuts up in the North Sacramento Valley area, and just has a crazy unique approach. He's developed over multiple decades a biological solution to basically manage his farm. So his production system is totally atypical from what you would see in normal almond production. So he has just an interesting farm management approach, and also what he's doing to the soil with this approach revitalizes it. And so he's able to plant permanent crops on ground that otherwise wouldn't be plantable. So it's kind of this land arbitrage plus this unique farm system that makes it much more profitable. He has a business where he does direct consumer nut butters. He really went down the regen rabbit hole like many of us had, and basically came up with a super unique approach. Just a fascinating experience. We toured several of his blocks, and we go to one, and across the street is a conventional block that's a couple years older, and his trees are much more established, looks much more healthier. I felt like I was in a regenerative documentary tie-up where you look one side and pure green lush, and the other side is death and despair, not quite that drastic, but it was a pretty awesome experience. So it was cool to have him on the podcast to talk about his story, his journey, what got him into the space, and where he's at now. So with that, let's jump in with what's top of mind for Arun.
Well, top of mind is obviously this big movement. We got a new president, and it seems like they're geared towards a little more on the healthier side, right? Which needs to be done. So that's exciting. It just happened. Just got sworn in a couple of days ago, and it's a big deal. I just like what he believes in as far as what he's bringing in for the health movement. If you got kids, I got a 9 and 10-year-old, a 9-year-old boy, 10-year-old daughter, and the future's being the country that we are. It's not about just having the strongest military. To me personally, I'd rather see my kids and family have healthy food available at this point. Being that we're farmers, I think we have some say, right? Because we can grow and choose the healthier road. And so, we pick the healthiest crops to grow, which is for us, it's almonds and walnuts. And then you take that and go organic with that. That gives you a whole different insight. And so, and the cleaner you can make that product, and if it can stay here, which we were just talking about it earlier, found a way to kind of get the majority of our crops to stay here domestically. So.
Totally. No, I totally agree with you. I think it's going to be exciting to see where this goes and what momentum comes around healthy food and healthy eating and what that means for agriculture, especially for, your farm with nuts, our farm with vegetables. I think there's a lot of opportunity there that we're definitely following closely. Aaron, Tim went to your farm, a few months back, and he calls me immediately after. He's like, Tyler, I've got to tell you about this farm, and this guy is so cool, and he's just doing all this cool stuff. And of course, when that happens, what do Tim and I say to each other? We got to get him on the pod. So that because we have this outlet, an excuse to talk to you. So I'm learning your story for the first time, but tell us a little bit more about yourself, your background, what ultimately led you to ag.
Well, ultimately led me to ag. I guess let's start with that, and what ultimately got me here was my dad, obviously coming from India when he was 12, couldn't get into work for anything else. But in those days, 1971, he could get a job pretty much at 12, 13 years old. It looks like if you have a mustache, man, they'll take you in, and they'll put him to work. So he went to work for a nursery at the time. And started because he was quick, nimble, little guy, young. And so you're a lot in your hands and knees when you're in a nursery field. So he went to work for them, stayed with them for many, many years. I'd say about 30 years, I think, 25, 30 years. And then eventually branched out into making his own nursery. Now, when I say nursery, where they grow baby trees, peaches, prunes, walnuts, almonds. You grow them for about a year to 2 years, and then you sell them to farmers that are growing that particular crop. And so that came along, and he, the nursery that he was working for had some hard times, too much overhead. And then he kind of started doing his own thing and opened up his own nursery, which was gutsy, risky, you name it, 1987, 88, something like that. But yeah, he's just kind of branched out. So he was doing the growing, the selling, and the harvesting of this nursery. Pretty much him and a couple of guys that were his friends at the time, couldn't afford much labor. But yeah, then after a couple of years of farming the normal way, which was the conventional fertilizers and everything else, he started noticing that he was depleting the soil rapidly. Because when you're growing trees from a pit, which is a seed, or a cutting, you're trying to go from, essentially a couple inch cutting or a seed to 20 feet tall within 7 or 8 months of growth time. So you're really pulling the nutrients from the soil, right? And whenever the soil is compromised in any way, you're going to see it quickly. You're not going to make size that you have on contract with these farmers. So you're saying you're going to sell this guy a 3/4 inch tree. You got to show up with a diameter, of a 3/4 inch tree. Otherwise, you're not fulfilling your contractual agreement. So with that being said, he, kind of kept it going this traditional way with the fertilizers and all that. What we noticed then was you start creating that salt barrier where you weren't getting any earthworms present in those in the nursery fields. And then before we knew it, the trees weren't able to make size. And on top of that, some of the trees that were more susceptible, which was like the walnuts, the cherries, started showing up with crown gall, which is kind of like a cancerous tumor. Ultimately kills the tree 4, 5, 6 years down the road. And so that started to happen. And now imagine the guy's growing the trees, he's selling the trees. And then when you uproot these trees, people don't realize, you guys being vegetable farmers and stuff, trees, you can operate as humans you can uproot them and transplant them anywhere when they're sedated, when they're defoliated. So when trees lose their leaves, it's like you and me putting us to sleep. You can operate on our brains and our hearts when we're sedated. You do that when we're alive, we're dead, right? You'll kill us. So you uproot a tree while it still has its leaves intact and it's growing season, you'll kill it. But we'll go ahead and pull these trees out in January and February, usually, and they'll transplant them in other farmers' fields. So all year you spend growing this crop, and then you spend selling your whatever spare time you have. He's going around to other farmers, trying to meet with them, trying to sell these trees to them. And so he goes there, makes the sale, everything's good. And then when we go to uproot them in January, the trees would show up, there'd be a cancerous tumor on the bottom. So their immune system of the tree was so compromised. So this poor guy, my dad, he's left with not being able to fulfill these farmers' orders. Now the farmers, irate, incredibly mad and disappointed, which rightfully so, it should be. So yeah, there was a need. And so I get a call from my dad at this point. And, he's like, hey man, everybody's blown away. We don't know what to do, but we're devastated, and I don't know much of anything at that point. I'm not a biotech guy or chemistry major by any means. I'm an econ major out of Chico State. And I said, that's interesting. And so he goes, yeah, man, I could use anybody's help at this point. Come on, over and see what's up. So I drive over there. I drop what I'm doing. Obviously, when your dad calls you, you got to go and help. That's what farmers do. You kind of help out. You help your parents, you help out your fellow farmers, whatever it takes. And that stays with me to this day, right? Any farmer that's out there, we're all on the same team. So I go out there and I said, it didn't take me long. I said, I'm already going this organic route for myself as far as diet goes. What would happen? I'm walking this field with my dad. I said, what would happen if we go the organic route and try to grow these things organically? Their immune system would be enhanced, thus maybe creating a difference in the cancerous tumors. And he said, well, you're not going to make the size because nothing available. Like we've never heard of anybody growing organically. This was, mind you, 1990. You didn't have much of it. The computers were just coming out. The internet was just coming out. There wasn't all this YouTube video that you can go to. So you're on your own. You start making some calls with guys and the well-known chemical companies that we were using, and they all said the same thing. You're not going to make size. There's not going to be no way that's apparent to them. So then you start going the traditional route. I said, okay, we're on our own. So I tell my dad, I said, I'll take maybe 10 rows that are planted 50 inches apart. Give me those 10 rows and I'll start seeing what I can do. And we'll see how this stuff turns out. Now you uproot these trees every year, right? And you get a chance to see their root system as well. So that was the interesting point that we made. But right out of the gate, I started tinkering with, your manures, your compost, different teas, if you will, talking to some of the marijuana growers and the pot growers that were growing in pots and trying to get bits and pieces of information from them. Well, all along, I was 8 years old. So I'll stop there and I'll kind of channel back to the main portion of what we were working on. And that was my grandmother had got me a fish tank, a 10-gallon fish tank when I was 8 years old. Okay. Now, when I was doing these water changes, if everybody knows anything about fish, every week you got to dump out at least half the water and put fresh water in when you're going this route. Okay. And so, and I would just dump it out on the lawn, the front lawn. And my dad came in and he goes, hey, man, every time I get to this portion where you're dumping this fish water out, it's really, and he's got one of those old push mowers. He goes, every time I push that mower, it takes a lot of energy off that one patch. That patch of grass is getting really thick. Why don't you start putting that fish water in other places? And so I said, okay, fair enough. So I started putting it on my lawn and other places. And before you knew it, wherever I was dumping this old fish water once a week, that grass was getting really strong, tall, this little pile of, 5 gallons of water was just pushing the green growth. You could see it from a mile away, right? So I knew all along as we got older, the fish tanks got bigger, and things happened and we could afford a bigger tank. And I was getting bigger as older and I was more into it. It was a nice hobby. But every time I knew, and it stayed with me, that something along the way that the fish and the water in the fish, the nutrition in there would help grow at least your lawn, if nothing else, right? And so this problem occurred with the dad's nursery. and the family nursery, the family business. And we're coming in, and I'm like, you know what? If I could get my hands on some biological, fish hydrolysate or something, and that was available from a couple of different sources. So I started going that route. But what I discovered was when you seal off the fish hydrolysate, when they put it in these 5-gallon buckets, if you will, the oxygen is cut off to it. And there's only a certain amount of oxygen in this bucket. And so it's dead, essentially, by the time you get it. And so it wasn't beneficial. So I wasn't gaining anything there. So whatever I was doing had to be live. And so that stayed with me as well. So that was part of the equation. As I had my access to a computer lab in Chico State, of all places, couldn't even afford a computer back in those days, right? And so I go into the computer lab and start doing some research on the greenest place on Earth, which happened to be the Amazon, right, per capita. So if you take, a square mile, if you will, I guess is what they do, is it's the greenest place on Earth. I still think it's today still considered that. So you start doing research as to why it's the greenest place on Earth. Is it the environment? Is it the climate? Is it people pruning and doing what we're doing in conventional farming here? No one's doing anything. And yet the biological system that's there present is creating this greenest place on Earth that's visible from outer space, right? So there was something there. So as we started digging in further, the river there and the Amazon would flood a few times a year, essentially creating then what I was kind of already going down that road, which everything in the river then floats out, all the nutrition, the biological microbes and everything else that you would imagine that's in the river, your fish waste and everything else gets out into the rural parts of the jungle, right? And feeds the trees. But the interesting point was the nutrition lasted and there was no trees dying because the river would recede, right? After the monsoons would go away and the rains would go away, the river recedes. And so the nutrition would last. It would be so adequate for these trees to function year round that there wasn't a period of where there would be yellowing or getting sick or falling over. But so that stayed with me. And so that was part of the equation. That was actually a vital part of the equation, is to get access to the nutrition found in that river, which there's certain species of fish is what I was going for. And so when Tim pulled up to the shop at my Pleasant Grove Ranch, there's giant fish tanks, set up inside with fish that are like 3 feet long. Some of them they've gotten even bigger. And it's phenomenal to see. And you don't see that every day at an agricultural site, right? You got trees and you got tractors. That's basic.
First time seeing a fish tank in a farm building.
Yeah. Yep. So it was kind of unique. And so we knew then that I had to get my hands on fish tanks. And so I would get fish and bigger fish tanks. And I started bringing that into the nursery and incorporating that in to my growing technology. And the cool part is the actual water, contrary to everybody else's, beliefs, doesn't smell. So if you have a good, adequate, functioning fish tank, you shouldn't be able to smell anything. It doesn't smell like fish hydrolysate, for example. So you don't get that really fishy smell out of your crops, which is vital as well, which is really important. But once that took shape, I started doing experiments. And the first year out of the gate, those trees, the root system was spectacular. The first thing we noticed was we were able to get a lot of feeder roots. Now, the size definitely wasn't as big as the conventional with the fertilizer, but we were right out of the gate going organic, eliminated, I would say, about 90% of the cancerous tumors on those 10 rows. So we were able to sell every one of those trees. And so my dad was blown away when we uprooted those trees. The feeder root system, so normally on a tree, you would get, maybe 10, 15 strong, hardy roots, very few feeder roots, the fine hair-like roots that pull in a lot of the nutrients. And so as we started seeing that, we're like, hey, man, we're getting like the same 10 or 15 big roots, but we're getting hundreds of feeder roots. Whereas when we grow conventional, we weren't getting any feeder roots. The reason why was that the byproduct of conventional fertilizers is sodium chloride, right? So fertilizers, it's a salt, basically. And the salt would burn those fine feeder roots. And so the trees were compromised right out of the gate. They didn't have those pliable feeder roots. And so the more roots you have, the more nutrition the tree can pull in, right? More mouths, basically, for that tree. So, yeah, with that being said, we went on this journey, and that was 16, 17 years of research, inputting more stuff. Now we got, all kinds of stuff from biochar to calcium carbonates to our live fish tanks, putting in all that fish water. And now we're able to multiply these microbes and put them onto thousands of acres using organic molasses, branched chain amino acids. You name it, it's all in this 2-part play of a primer and a biological amendment to the soil, which is called worm fuel. And so that then led us onto this path of success. Now we're growing in the nursery. As far as I know, we're the only ones that can say we're pretty much growing. Everything that we're growing in the nursery, nutritional wise, is organic. And we have hardly, if any, that I can recall, trees, that not a single tree with a cancerous tumor on it. And so, as far as what it's worth, how that can relate to our humans, lifestyle, it shows me that, man, eating healthy and going as clean as possible can make a huge difference on even human life. And so you start tying it together. So we start implementing this on our children, right? And we got, by the grace of God, blessed with a boy and a girl. So you can check on both. The kids are usually first or second as far as height in their schools every time in their class, and they're only 4th and 5th graders. So we got a ways to go, but getting sick a lot less than their peers.
Super cool story and background. Love everything that you're up to. Maybe let's chat a little bit more about kind of after you got the nursery kind of on this new program and kind of stabilize the ship there. Like, talk to us about kind of the steps from there. Like, now you're obviously managing a lot of farms and have kind of gone in that direction as a farmer yourself. Maybe talk to us about the steps after getting the family business situated.
Yeah. So obviously Dad's ecstatic. We're not having to tell farmers and making that call. And he would make a lot of those calls, being really sad and disappointed and losing business because farmers think that you just sold your trees to somebody else when realistically they were in the burn pile, and he would have to send pictures or have the farmer show up. So that was all gone now. So the nursery started to flourish, and knowing that when you're giving people an ultimately extremely clean tree so that when they plant it, they're not going to show up with a cancerous tumor 4 or 5 years into the road, which is a big deal. And so then word got out that, hey, these guys' trees produce heavy and they don't have this cancerous tumor. That was big. And so business really took off for the family and we became, able to have more resources was the main thing, right? And so at that point, we were able to buy our first ranch, like a 40-acre ranch, which was a huge deal because all we had, your 10 or 15 acre blocks, and then the 40 was the biggest. Picked that up. It was an existing prune ranch, did the same technology there, kept going with it. And we said, hey, we're going to do this our way. We were able to not use any kind of fumigation. Typically you're susceptible to that. But we were able to just pull out this old prune ranch that had been there for 27 years and plug in our walnut ranch right on top of that. So we yanked out these old prune trees, went in, did it all in-house because we knew what we had. So if there was any remnants of old roots and decaying matter of these prune trees, which obviously there would be, that we had the antidote. And so that gave us the confidence to keep moving forward. And so we did that. And to this day, that ranch is still with us. Now it's in their 17th year. Not a single tree with a cancerous tumor. We're getting record-breaking yields out of that ranch. We're showing as far as financial gains out of that place. And I'm always open about this with all the guys that come through. You buy the ranch for $400,000 in those days. Obviously, that's 17 years ago. We're basically making $250,000 to $300,000 every year off that ranch. So it's mind blowing. Now that's what farming's supposed to be like, right? And so what people don't realize is on a front of trees, when it comes to trees, is that when you lose 5 trees, 10 trees, 15 trees, the first thing that those trees do is that for that share is now a 0 crop out of that area, out of that section. Once that happens, you could score like when you go to school, right? Say you get 100% on one test. On the next test, you get a 0. Let's just say you miss it. You were sick. Well, now your overall grade in that class is a 50, which is still a failing grade. Does that make sense? And so people don't realize that is that once you start losing trees, that comes off your profit first. You can't afford to have a tree die. You can't even afford to have a tree go sick. And we have friends, family, neighbors, other ranchers saying, well, I got 10,000 trees. If I lose, 100 trees, it's no big deal. You don't realize that the expense is still relevant. Like it's still going to be there for that particular block of trees that you lost. You still got to go through. You still got to, put your amendments and water, irrigate, all that stuff, harvest. You got to take that into account. You can't afford to lose a single tree. So therefore, health on a tree level to be successful is immense. Like when you guys are growing your garlic, if you lose a few acres out of your, say, 50-acre block, that's trouble. That's all profit. So what we discovered was with growing this route that we don't give up too many acres. We don't give up too many trees. The trees all stay healthy. So the biological amendment that we're talking about is the worm fuel. That's what we developed. And it's mobile. Microbes can move through the water. And the earthworms that it attracts also obviously are extremely mobile. And so people don't realize that what a tree needs to really flourish, or a plant, right? It's carbon, 47%, oxygen, 43%, hydrogen, 4, nitrogen, 3. This is what makes up our basic plant or tree. So think about that for a second. Carbon and oxygen are pretty much your biggest portions, right? 47 and 43%. Yet chemical companies and PCAs, you name it, are shoving nitrogen, which is only 3%, down our throat and telling us we need nitrogen, we need nitrogen, we need nitrogen, NPK. But, carbon and oxygen, the last time I checked, it's almost free. If we can create a way to get oxygen down in our soil, you're miles ahead of everybody else. And that's what these worms will do. So the biological amendment worm fuel will bring up the earthworms from many different depths. The worms create holes and tunnels right throughout the soil, which takes the oxygen right where you need it, to the root system. And now with that being said, they also deposit their castings. And so with their castings is creating your carbon. They're chewing up the microbes, which the microbes are dissolving and chewing up the old leaf matter and organic matter in the soil. And so as that's coming through the soil, you're getting everything that you pretty much need right where you need it. Your hydrogen will come from your water. Your nitrogen, we people don't realize, the air that we breathe in, from what I've heard, is 78% is nitrogen available in the air. So as you start pulling in these plants, cover crops, or in your guys' case, the row crops themselves, are actually able to pull, depending on the color and the hue of the green on the leaves of these plants that we're working on, are able to pull in the nitrogen. We hear about it now, nitrogen fixing plants and everything else. So basically, I guess in essence, as long as you have a ton of earthworms, and when we pull up a shovelful, we're on record with pictures showing that we had 200 plus earthworms in these pictures in one shovelful. Now, they say, which is a really unique quote, and this is going to be a mind-blowing quote I'll share with you guys, and you'll probably have to say it over, and maybe on the website or on the podcast we can post it, but it's a quote that I just came across, and it was something that I had to share. So hold on for a second. Okay, so we take 1 million earthworms per acre is about 25 earthworms per square foot of soil. So basically one shovelful. So if you have about 25 earthworms in one shovelful, this is what we're talking about. And if those earthworms would work only 100 days per year, eat their weight in soil, and create their castings, at that rate, you would have 1 ton of earthworms castings per acre. You would create 100 tons of earthworm castings manure, basically, per year. 100 tons of castings if you're able to pull up 25 earthworms in a shovel. 100 tons of anything per acre is huge, right? And so that's what we work on. Our specialty is the ability to bring up record amounts of earthworms. And that's where this thing led us to, is that we are constantly, when Tim came to my ranch there with a pocket knife, we were able to pick up one to just flip up the dirt. You're able to get 1 or 2 earthworms. Now, obviously it varies from season to season. At peak heat of 120 degrees, you're going to have to search for them a little bit. But if you come in the morning, it's nice and cool. And those days you could find them easily. And that was the goal, is to create as many earthworms per shovelful that a person could imagine.
All right, Aaron, much to digest here. Super cool story. First quick question is like, how are you educating yourself on this process? Like, are you hearing what's going on in it? Because you guys were pretty early to this, it sounds like. Were you familiar with some of the other big regenerative ag soil health advocates and people and teachers about what they were doing and how they were thinking about soil health, biology, etc.? Were you kind of doing this just by trial and error? Like,
Yeah.
how are you getting kind of your education on it versus just, this is just working?
Okay, so I did have a cloning lab. So that for passion, I know this is just the way my brain works, but I had a cloning lab. So you're able to clone plants and trees for the nursery, and therefore you don't have to use a cutting or a seed. Now, I didn't like doing it that way, but it was a great test subject. They're still available. There's just certain cuttings and certain species when they're, create these new, let's say, walnut rootstocks. The only way to drive them and get what we need is through tissue culture. So we went down that road. So I had that available to me. All of my own ranches are still off of seed. I love the variant, and I love having, variable DNA, if you will, for each individual tree, so to speak. They're going to be the same hybrid paradox that we use on the walnuts, but they're not clones, right? They're from individual seeds from different mother trees. And that was the way I like doing it. But that gave me the insight to be able to do trial and error way more. And I have a state-of-the-art greenhouse, 10,000 square foot greenhouse that I use and utilize. So I was able to run multiple experiments as to what would work and how much it would work really rapidly, almost by the end of the day. So if you were to put a few drops of a, biological amendment of any kind in the morning, right? 6 a.m., 7 a.m. in the morning, by 3 p.m., you would see that tree growth 2 or 3 millimeters more than the rest, right? Or it would start to not move anything or do anything at all. Now, as the week would progress or the days would progress even, you're able to see that. And then I was able to implement that on a nursery level outside of the greenhouse immediately. And I would go for it. And so I had nothing to lose at the time. So when you got that feeling of nothing to lose, not as much pressure, right? If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. That was awesome to have that ability. But yeah, that gave me, so it was more or less, to answer your question, Tyler, was trial and error, because I didn't have all the resources we have available now. And so constantly now, though, we're always searching and listening and talking. We don't have all the answers by any means. Doesn't mean even my method is the greatest method of all time, right? We don't know for sure.
So now let's talk about like business model and monetization. So it sounds like you up till maybe recently, you've monetized this pretty lucratively by doing, farm development, right? Is you have a solution where you can go and increase value on land, and both in equity value and in cash flows for just land farm development. And then also now you have this product that you are looking to also expand. Is that right? Like where are you thinking this thing goes?
Yeah, no, so that's the thing. So we have this ability with bringing up these, literally tons of earthworms that you can go ahead and take class 4 soil, which we're doing now in Pleasant Grove for the last 5 years, going on our 5th year. that you can take class 4 soil, red, almost Grand Canyon orange soil, and turn that eventually into hopefully class 1 and class 2 soil. But the yields that we're pulling off, just for example, for last year, are, again, same story as the Yuba City ranches. You're kind of getting to that point where you're showing a 60, 70, 80% return on land value of the initial purchase price of just the dirt, and so those are big returns. So we continued on and we keep buying more acreage. While doing so, the best feeling of it all is that you're truly cutting edge. You're not having to use compost brought in from anywhere. You're not using manures brought in from anywhere. These are big things because, as we were touching on earlier, the compost and the manures that we're bringing in could have or harbor your E. coli and salmonella risks increase. And so, as no matter what everybody says, hey, it's not from the field, it's from the processing plant or whatever, it's still, as a farmer, you bear the brunt of it, because usually on a lot of cases for farmers, it's a tough time to survive in this state, especially, so we got to be careful. But so the worm fuel itself is available to farmers. Tim was nice enough to give us his time to come down and check it out. This is a different way of doing it than everybody else when they're selling anything. I always try to say to everybody, come out and take a tour. It's worth it before we sell them anything. They got to give us their 10 or 15 minutes, and it could last an hour or 2 hours. I'm always available. Tour around the fields, and you're going to get a chance to tour the worst of the worst soil, right? Your class 4 stuff. And if you see things there that are unexplainable or you're seeing that are just wonderful looking trees, healthy, and we'll show you our neighbors' trees that are growing with conventional fertilizers. And if you can use, the visual effects there, say, hey man, this is the way I want to go, not the other way with the chemicals. If there's enough difference there, then we always tell everybody to start off with your smallest block. Again, not needing the income from the worm fuel, which sounds totally really bad sales techniques, right? You're saying, hey, don't even buy it. You're not going to get it unless you take a tour. That will take a lot of people out, right? They're like, hey, I'm not going to go spend my time with this guy. I'm just calling you. Give me the product. That's all I want to do. And I always say, no, you come down, at least your first shot, take a look, and then put it on your smallest block. And then we'll go from there. That's what I was trying to do. I try to minimize the risk for anybody at that point. So that eliminates a lot of the naysayers because they're like, hey, man, your ranches look amazing. I want to do my whole ranch. Thank you for the tour. Let's do the whole thing. And I still tell them, no, let's just do your smallest block. Obviously, it's a free country. If that's what you want, then we'll do it. But now we're getting that word out. In the last 6-7 years, we went to the public because of the demand. People were just, hey, man, what are you putting on your trees? They would ask the neighbors that were getting this stuff, what they're putting on. And then his neighbor comes in, then that guy's neighbor comes in. And so we had this chain reaction where people were going all over the place and pulling this product in. So there was a demand. And again, like I said originally, it's always about helping. We're all in the same boat. All farmers, whether they're here, Idaho, Kentucky, Montana, it doesn't matter anywhere. We're there to help. It's American farmers versus the world, if you will. We got to show up with our walnuts, our almonds. You guys got to show up with your vegetables on a global scale. And if they're able to use different chemicals, different labor practices in other countries, us being more so, right, or being a transportable, nut, basically, the almonds and walnuts are shipped all over the world. We got to be able to compete. We got to have something different. And so, yeah, everything's available as far as resources. The worm fuel is available. The ranches obviously appreciate rapidly when you're able to grow and keep now. It's not just the dirt and being close to an affluent city like Roseville for some of these, Pleasant Grove sites. But when you're able to show, that you're getting this kind of income, it becomes a huge business then. So it's a two-part play. The land increases in value because every time everybody knows this, right? They're not creating too much more land. It is what it is. And so there you have that supply and demand issue. But when you start showing an adequate business and profitable from that plot of dirt, then you're going to go ahead and be able to gain from that plot of dirt. And so it's kind of nice. So it's a two-part play if you're able to rip and recondition the soil and repurpose it from other crops. Because this is like the last 7 or 8 ranches that we've taken over were all rice fields previously.
Yeah, this combination of kind of the land arbitrage, but also just the economics of this type of a production system. Like, one thing I just want to make clear is like, yeah, how simple this is. Like when I was there, like you have, a couple guys managing your entire operation, and I believe it's 3 applications of worm fuel where you're doing none of the conventional fertility or crop protection. Like that's what, like, when I was called Ty after I left a ranch, it was like this guy's like doing things differently. He's like totally unplugged from like the traditional ag ecosystem. It was just a pretty impressive way to operate.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. No, that's what we kind of stride ourselves in. Is we minimize. What happens is when you keep the feeder roots, is that the tree, if you imagine, is right like 30 feet tall, 25 feet tall, 20 feet tall. It has an immaculate, really strong root system. But if you go the conventional route where you're burning these feeders, you don't have that in place. So the weeds run rampant, right? And so, but if you have the shade of this canopy of this tree, you have all these feeder roots that are about a ½ inch below the surface and then work their way all the way down. So if the weed seed's trying to push up out of the ground and pull nutrients, it's now got to compete with this gigantic tree compared to the wheat. And so that's what happens. We're able to save on herbicides because of that reason, is we got immaculate, intense shade. The leaf matter and the growth is really thick. On a molecular basis, the leaf is extremely thick. When you try to tear some of our walnuts and our almond tree leaves, you can considerably see the difference from our neighbor's leaves. It's like trying to cut and tear cardboard versus a piece of paper, right? And that's the difference that we're trying to go for. And so, we're able to absorb more sunlight, a lot of photosynthesis, obviously created. But all the way around, it diminishes the need for 10 people. We're getting away with 3. And so it's amazing how, just like our human health, we know that if we kind of cut back on our fast food, that usually we're going to pay less visits to the doctor. It's as simple as that. But yet, you would think that people know that by now, yet some of the lines in the drive-thru certain times of the day still pack up. Now, I will give you this. Me and my kids are always kind of checking this out, that the lines at our local fast food chains are cutting back. They're not as big as they once were. So people are catching on, and us as farmers, we got to catch on our crops and the way we're growing things, right? Is that, hey, we got to stay away from fast food as fertilizer. Okay. That's why I try to tie things together, is that fast foods is fertilizer. If we can get ourselves to wean ourselves off of that, I think we're money ahead in so many different avenues.
Aaron, as we wrap up, I mean, I know you've been chatting with, distribution and retailers. I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are you hearing from them in terms of like their appetite for this uniquely grown food and that's grown organically and with your approach? Are you seeing positive response from retailers?
Yeah, no, definitely. We're definitely seeing a huge positive response as the news of more outbreaks on Salmonella and E. coli are taking shape on a lot of these different grocery outlets. We're the only ones that we know of at this level growing. When I say level, I mean yields, right? Millions of pounds, growing without compost, growing without manure of any kind, chicken or any kind of animal manure at that point. So that then, diminishes your chances of catching or getting E. coli, right? And showing up on your crop. But at the same time, when we started doing a little further research, is the earthworms, when there is some of this stuff present, are able to come up and, devour the soil, basically, to put it in that, different way of putting it. But they actually end up eating the soil, which could have and harbor that E. coli. So now, as it goes through the worm's digestive tract, you're able to eliminate some of that. So not only are you not taking the risk of showing up with E. coli, but you're actually diminishing those chances. And so as these grocery outlets are kind of hear this news and us growing this way, they are obviously after that, that product where you can grow without, having that risk. Because when a grocery outlet gets hit with an E. coli outbreak, then you got to pull that product off the shelf. You lose that money. Then the farmer, his crop is a lot less valuable at that point because people are not buying it when it goes out in your local media and news outlets. Oh, don't eat, organic carrots was a big one just a few months back. And people aren't keen and or addicted to organic carrots. I've never heard of anybody saying, hey, they're addicted to eating carrots, right? I've heard of, hey, I'm addicted to drinking Pepsi. I got to have my Pepsi a day. I've had Doritos, I got to have my Doritos. But I've never heard anybody say that they're addicted to those things. So they don't have that property to get the sales back as fast. Finally, by the graces of just repetitive, hey, eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, and now eat your organic vegetables, the stores are making a little bit of a headway of getting some sales going, getting some traction going. And then you get hit with this. And that breaks that chain, that repetitive, the routine that the families had formed. So it's really a huge setback when that happens. And so if we're able to think of a better way and show farmers a better way of all but diminishing that risk, right? And helping them out and getting that size, getting that flavor. Because when you grow this way, you're creating this new soil in the root zone that these earthworms are putting in the root zone of the plant or the tree. You're going to be able to pick up a lot more different types of flavor, which is, dare I say it, almost virgin soil-like, right? As if you've got that many worms bringing up that much new soil, turning it over and over again, that plant is going to flourish. And as the plant flourishes, it's pulling in more nutrients. So whatever you're growing is going to be way more nutrient dense. So your dollar is going further. When you buy that garlic, that spinach, that almond, that walnut that's grown with this worm fuel product, you're essentially going to have the best product that's available on this planet, is what I believe.
Super cool stuff, Aaron. You gave me a jar of almond butter on my drive home from the farm tour. I ate about half of it on the drive home, and the rest was gone the next day. It's awesome stuff. It's been amazing chatting with you. As we wrap up, how can our listeners get in touch and connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, I guess at this point, I'm, being that I should give out my email, be it there on the web on the podcast, I guess, right, guys? You guys can put that up there. But I mean, I'm able to put my phone number up there. I'm going to do as a good friend of mine, Clayton Handy, does. He gives his phone number out on his products, on his website, and his phone's constantly ringing by guys making a purchase of $5, $10, $20, and his phone's just ringing off the hook. I'm going to go ahead and do that at this point because I'm old school. I love talking to somebody, and if this gets them on the right track, because I'm sure after they watch your podcast, they're going to have a lot of questions. How can this help me? Where does this benefit this, and how, whatever, but I'll do it. We'll see how that works. Hopefully I don't have to change my phone number and it keeps going off the, so I'll go ahead and do it. That's 530-682-2657.
So Tim, you visited his farm, you had him on the pod. What do you think of the conversation?
Awesome conversation. I'm glad we're able to share this with people. Like, it's just a really unique operator that I think is like untethered from traditional agriculture. Like, this guy is not using traditional ag retailers. He's making his own inputs on farm. He has this differentiated approach. So I think it's really cool what he's doing. It was awesome to be able to meet him on person and finally get him on the podcast.
Totally. Wild to see that people can be really successful operating in a silo, from the conventional wisdom, conventional industry. And so glad we got to share his story. So hope you guys enjoyed it. Aaron's email, and I think he shared his phone number in the episode, are available if you want to reach out to him. Thanks for listening. And we will be back hopefully with an emergency pod to cover this USDA Doge madness.